We have to go after them. Go after the states that sponsor terrorism. And go after them economically, diplomatically, and if necessary, militarily. Blow up children to smithereens in a bus. Who deliberately target cities. So we thought that the way to change this, the explosion of terrorism that shook the world was to harness the free societies for a different position against terrorism. They were all making their separate deals, trying to cut their separate deals with these or that terrorists, and said, no, terrorism is international, it has to be fought internationally.
Tel Aviv, Benjamin Netanyahu. Start with Zionism in general. Where does it begin in your mind?
Where does it begin?
Yeah.
It begins with Abraham.
Love that.
He goes from the land of Ur, which is somewhere in Iraq, to the Holy Land about 3,500 years ago. Yeah. About 1,500 years later, King David sets up the kingdom of Israel. Before that, the children of Abraham go to Egypt. There's a drought in the land. They have to eat. Well, they go down there. Their brother, whom they sold into slavery, is the number 2, the deputy of the Pharaoh. He reveals himself to them in one of the most poignant chapters in the Bible. I don't know if you read the story of Joseph and his brothers.
One or two times.
I think it's one of the most moving human stories. Yeah. Just so raw, emotional. Yeah. When he reveals himself to them, and they come to Egypt, they stay there for a few hundred years, become slaves. Moses takes them out, brings them to the Holy Land. Joshua doesn't enter the Holy Land. Joshua conquers the land. But the tribes of Israel are not united. Finally, they choose King Saul. He's beaten by the Philistines, who are not Palestinians. They're a Greek seafaring people on the coast. And they choose a new king, David, who establishes the kingdom of Israel. And it's united for 80 years. Then it splits to the kingdom of Judea and the kingdom of Samaria. Samaria taken out by are exiled to the far corners of the earth. That's the 10 tribes of Israel. We don't know where they went. And the 2 tribes, Judah and Benjamin, remain in Judea. Mm-hmm. Jerusalem is their capital. And we remained there for a very long time until through successive conquests we're kicked out. But during that time we built, David's son Solomon builds the first temple, and after it's destroyed by the Babylonians, it's rebuilt again, the second temple, which is where Jesus overturned the money tables. Yep. Right? And that's destroyed by the Romans, and we're still there. We're still holding on to our land, to our cherished homeland. Finally, it took this prophet, a modern Moses, whose name is Theodor Herzl. He was a Jew who grew up, who was born in Hungary, and became a journalist, and he could see the fires of anti-Semitism beginning to rise in Europe. And he said there's only one solution for the Jewish people. It's to act on the biblical prophecy of the ingathering of the exile and to reestablish their independent state in their ancient homeland. And that's the movement he began at the end of the 19th century, which is called Zionism, for Mount Zion in the heart of Jerusalem. And there we accomplished it. So my father's generation was tasked with rebuilding the Jewish state. Yeah. My generation was tasked with protecting it and ensuring that it has a prosperous and secure future. In 1933, right when Hitler arose, he said that the scourge of Nazi racism was aimed, first of all, at the destruction of the entire Jewish people. He was perhaps the first or among the first to see that, what many refused to see. And second, he said that Hitlerism would threaten the entire world, and that our task, he said, was to alert the nations of the world to the danger of Hitler and explain to them that it's not only the Jewish people who would be in danger, but all the nations would be in danger. That's not bad. In 1933, my goodness, for a 23-year-old. The one man who fought to open it up was a man called Zev Jabotinsky, who was the founder of this movement, we're in the headquarters of the Likud movement, which was really founded by Jabotinsky a long time ago. Jabotinsky said, look, there is this Holocaust that's coming. And unless we bust open the gates of what is now Israel and get the Jews out, they'll all be destroyed. And he couldn't make any headway. He was in London trying to do this. And my father came to him in 1939 and he said, you have the right idea, but you're in the wrong place. And Jabotinsky was 60, he was a brilliant man. And here comes this 29-year-old kid. And he said, why do you say that? And he said, because the rising power in the world is America. And if you persuade America, then they will force Britain to change their policy. And so Jabotinsky called all his staff in and he said, you hear this guy, Netanyahu? He's right. We're moving. And they went to New York and began to agitate for a Jewish state there.
Beautiful. Wow.
That's at the start of World War II. Guess who? Well, Jabotinsky died shortly after they came there. And so my father really had to work on his own. And he started agitating for a Jewish state, both in public meetings and in meetings with officials. And first he went to the lowly officials, in the State Department, and they were all Arabists and they were anti-Zionists. They didn't want to upset the Arabs. But what they heard from my father was too important to just sweep under the rug. So he kept bringing him higher and higher to higher officials. And finally he got to Eisenhower, who was the head of the army after the victory of World War II. And Eisenhower said, why should we support you? And he said, because you're going to end up in a battle now over control of the Middle East, and the Soviets are going to move in, and the Arabs will be like putty in their hands. We will be Israel, this land, this state that we want to establish, will be the bastion of Western values in the heart of the Middle East. He said, but you're only 600,000 people. That's what we were at the time, 1947. How will you hold out? And he said, we'll be the strongest army in the Middle East. And Eisenhower said to my father, how's that possible? He said, my father said to Eisenhower, General, you've just seen in 2 world wars how we Jews fight for others. Can you imagine how strong we'll be when we fight for ourselves, for our homeland, for our history, and for our future? So Eisenhower was impressed, and he brought the general staff of the United States to hear him, and he wanted a 3rd meeting too. My father worked on public opinion and the opinion of leaders for Zionism, and then the state was established, and he withdrew from public life. And he was a historian, so that's what he did. But he taught me that you have to appeal to public opinion, and you have to appeal to the leaders. To public opinion, you appeal on the basis of justice. To leaders, you appeal on the basis of interest. In the case of Israel, justice and interest collided because it's just that the Jewish people who were dispersed for so many centuries would reassemble in their ancient homeland, just as the prophets prophesied. But it's also in the interest of the United States, as it turned out, a mighty interest to have a powerful ally representing our common interests and our common heritage in the heart of the Middle East.
And you write an extensive piece in your book about your brother. You both served in elite units, and the story of Yoni is a big piece of who and what your family is, and specifically you.
There's no question that the death of my brother in the historic Entebbe rescue, which was named after him, Operation Jonathan. His name was Jonathan, Yoni in the diminutive. That steered me to the present course of my life. He was a soldier in the paratroops. He was wounded in the last 3 hours of the 6-day wars. I was very happy to see that he didn't die, but that he was disabled. So I had this premonition that he would die in a war.
My goodness.
Now he's 21 years old. I'm 18 years old, about to enter the army. He's just been in a war. And, I see him in the hospital bed in Safed in the Galilee, surrounded by amputee soldiers. And his elbow is whole, but he's disabled. So I'm very happy.
Wow.
Oh, I'm very happy because he's going to live and he's not going to be in the military anymore. And sure enough, he goes to Harvard, gets accepted there, he gets to Walter Reed, he's hospital, he's operated on by fine American doctors, but he's not going to go to serve in the Army anymore, so I'm fine. But now I'm in the Army, okay? And I completed my service after 5 years and went to study, I have to say not at Yale, but at MIT. And he stayed in the Army and rose to the command of this unit and took his soldiers to the legendary rescue at Entebbe, where he was the only military casualty, where they rescued 103 Jewish hostages in the heart of Entebbe. And he fell while leading his men in storming the terrorists. They liberated the hostages, killed the terrorists, 2 Germans and 2 Palestinians, and all the Ugandan troops who were aiding them, brought the hostages back to Israel in what Drew Middleton of the New York Times, their analyst, said was a raid unprecedented in modern times. It's true, and Yoni had a lot to do with it, and I described this extraordinary rescue. But obviously, when he fell, I was already a student at MIT. I thought my life was over. Not only the extent of the loss, but also because of, which was inexpressible. I had to tell my parents. My father was teaching at Cornell University in Ithaca, New York at the time. And I went to tell my parents, which was something I described in the book, but it's actually worse than hearing about Yoni's death, if you can believe it. But that was as far as I was concerned, the end of my life, because I also had hopes that he would rise in the ranks and that as long as he was there, Israel would be protected. Now he was gone, and it was just impossible to describe the collapse. And what I describe in the book is how I emerged from this inconsolable grief to first lead a battle against international terrorism, and then enter the Israeli political world and become Israel's longest serving prime minister with a view of protecting our future and securing our destiny.
You were able to allow the miracle of Israel and its rebirth to rebirth yourself.
Yeah.
The hope that you described, that Israel is a parable of hope. It's a parable of faith.
Yeah.
You rose from the, in essence, ashes yourself to lead this great nation to where it is.
That's very perceptive. I didn't think that I would be able to do that at the time. During the Shiva, the 7 days of mourning, I had lost my sense of taste.
My goodness.
I was deep shock, deep sense of hopelessness. And then something happened in my military service. I almost drowned in a firefight in the Suez Canal. Almost drowned. I had to jumped into the water. The Egyptians were raiding the Israeli side of the canal. Yeah. Remember, we didn't have peace at that time. And the army decided to send my unit to the other side of the canal to hit back. So we did. We crossed on rubber boats, passed, attacked an Egyptian convoy, came back. It's not a pleasant thing, I'd describe it, but it's war. They were elated. They said, do it again. And I said, well, it's kind of close. I mean, we just did that. They might wait for us. Well, the second crossing, they did wait for us. And this is at night, we're crossing with the boats, all right? And they opened fire on us from these foxholes that they dug every 50 meters. And the bullets are just whizzing around us. The first hail of bullets hit one of my fellow soldiers, who was an exceptional guy, and he fell in the water, and we had to look for him days later. But all these bullets are whizzing around. I don't know if you see these movies like Normandy landing, right? Saving Private Ryan, same thing. Yeah. It's whizzing around and the bullets are in the water, but I thought we'd have a better chance if we're in the water, that we'd be protected. And the boat would continue to be rolling to the Israeli side. Well, I forgot when I jumped in that I was carrying a gunner's ammo pack of about 40 pounds on my back, and they were strapped for combat. So even though I inflated the life vest, it was only half inflated, and I began to sink. Now I'm sinking, I'm drowning. I'm going down to the bottom of the Suez Canal, okay? And with the remainder of strength that I had, I kicked myself up, gulped some air, went down again, and somebody, as my head is in the water, grabbed my hand, right? And grabbed my hand and pulled me up. I never knew who it was because there was a big argument who did it. My head was underwater, so I thanked everyone who claimed it.
Wow.
Claimed to have done that. And brought me to the other side of the canal, and somehow I survived. I felt during the days after Yoni's death, after Yoni's funeral, that I was drowning.
Wow.
And then somebody lurched out with a hand, and that somebody was actually a letter that was brought by a woman. She was 30 years old. She had been married to one of Yoni's friends who had died. And she had kept this letter that Yoni had written at the age of 17, 13 years earlier, to her late husband. And soon we started receiving letters from people whom Yoni wrote to because he expressed his soul in his letters. Remember, this is pre-digital age. That's how you communicated. And so we assembled, in a very short time, we assembled a few hundred of his letters, which was actually himself describing his life from the age of 17 until a few days before his fall at Entebbe. And we published it, and it became a very big sensation, a source of inspiration for decades of young Israelis. But that pulled me out of the water, okay? So I had a purpose. But then we said there's a larger purpose here, because it's true Yoni died in the battle against terrorism, but he didn't think that it was just a military battle. He thought it was a moral battle. Wow. Of free civilization against barbarians who broke every norm, every civilized norm, blow up children to smithereens in a bus, who deliberately target cities. So we thought that the way to change this, the explosion of terrorism that shook the world, was to harness the free societies for a different position against terrorism. They were all making their separate deals, trying to cut their separate deals with these or that terrorist. And said, no, terrorism is international. It has to be fought internationally. And we have to go after them. Go after the states that sponsor terrorism. And go after them economically, diplomatically, and if necessary, militarily. And so I organized some international conferences for that effect at the anniversary of Yoni's fall at Entebbe, and that reverberated, that got me into politics, and then the rest is where we've talked about it. But the main thing was that my emergence from ashes, as you call it, or from the depth of the abyss of despair, came from understanding that there is a purpose out there that I have to serve. And that purpose was to protect the Jewish state, which is the key to the survival of the Jewish people, but also to protect freedom. And that requires getting out of out of the abyss. And that's how I climbed out.
In our world, what we would say is God has chosen you to be in the position you are to protect this land. And it's a calling. That's the way an evangelical would say to you, you're called to protect this land. You are personally an analogy of what the state of Israel is. You used the miracle of Israel to rebuild yourself, and you're protecting that for others, for the next generation. And we recognize that very easily. We're in support of Israel, but we're in support of you because of those things. You've given me more insight as to who you are, and I have one final question, because I am asking now Prime Minister Netanyahu, elected now for the 6th time, day one of your 6th term as Prime Minister, what do you need to accomplish for the future of Israel and on behalf of the state?
Well, the first 3 things are easy. Block Iran, block Iran, block Iran. The fourth is a 5th peace treaty, which I believe we can have. And I think the best candidate and the most important one is Saudi Arabia, which effectively ends the Arab-Israeli conflict, the broader Arab-Israeli conflict, and creates a tremendous prospect for peace. The next thing is to unleash the enormous potential here for certain areas of technology. I won't bore you with this, but I think we can do incredible things. We just did that with COVID. We were the first country to emerge from COVID because we had a data bank of the medical records, anonymous by the way, but statistically very significant, of 98% of the Israeli citizenry, right? So that's what I told Albert Bourla of Pfizer here. You can find out if your thing works because we have you can find out if diabetes patients can take your vaccine or not, and what effects would it have, and so on. So now we have another database that we can have. If you'll volunteer to give me your saliva, and we couple these 2 databases, we have an enormous thing that no other country has. So there are 5, 6 big areas like that. That is just tremendous innovation. And you know what the other thing is? Change the Israeli political system. Because we can't go on having these elections.
Please.
So I have my hands full. But if you ask me what is the one reason why I'm coming back to a life of politics, which is very hard in Israel. It's very cruel and it's unforgiving. Even though I'm very grateful to the support of millions in Israel and outside Israel for helping me go through the pitfalls and the great sacrifice that politics involved. The one reason that I'm going back, the one reason is Iran. Because other things can be fixed. There eventually have to be other leaders who come to the fore, and there will be. And one hopes that they're capable and visionary and purposeful. But my purpose is to prevent the one thing that can scuttle the ship, and that's Iran, a nuclear Iran. And that is something that I think is not only important for our future, but for yours as well. So that's the reason I'm going in. And if I had to summarize, Matt, what I would say to those who in your audience who I think live their lives, understand that it's not just a day-to-day thing. They seek a life of purpose. I can say that I've lived a life of purpose. And my purpose is to protect the future of the Jewish people, but also the future of freedom to the extent that I can affect it. And I think anybody who's interested in living a life of purpose should read this book.
Benjamin Netanyahu, Bibi, my story. Wow. There are more people praying for you than you can imagine. the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Our audience loves Israel. They love you. They love what you're doing. And we appreciate everything. And
Well,
thank you for
and I deeply, deeply appreciate the support of Christians. Christian Zionism made Jewish Zionism possible.